Welcome to our deep dive today. We're going to be exploring some pretty surprising connections between Bulgarian history and various Turkic peoples.
Yeah.
You might be thinking, well, duh, the Ottomans. But get this.
Right.
Your source materials actually suggest that these connections go way deeper and way further back than just the Ottoman era.
Yeah, what's fascinating here is that we often have these neat little boxes for history. Here's the Bulgarian box, over there is the Turkic box.
Right.
But what your sources are kind of revealing is that those boxes were constantly bumping up against each other.
Yeah.
Overlapping, even merging at times.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
Yeah.
So where do we even begin to unpack this?
Well, let's start by shattering a common assumption about the Second Bulgarian Empire.
Okay.
The one often celebrated as this resurgence of purely Bulgarian power.
Right.
You ready for this?
I think so. Hit me.
It was actually founded by dynasties with Cuman roots.
Wait, seriously. The Second Bulgarian Empire, founded by Cumans.
The Cumans, or Kipchaks, as they were also known, were a powerful nomadic Turkic group who held sway over large parts of Eastern Europe.
Okay.
And two brothers, Peter and Ivan Asen, who led the uprising against Byzantine rule in 1185 and essentially kickstarted the Second Bulgarian Empire.
Right.
They came from a Cuman dynasty.
That's a pretty huge detail to just leave out of the usual story, isn't it?
Well, yeah.
It really makes you wonder what else we're missing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's why this deep dive is so important.
Uh-huh.
It challenges us to reconsider the historical narrative that we might have taken for granted.
Okay, so if the Cumans were involved in the Second Bulgarian Empire,
Yeah.
does that mean there were other Turkic groups in the picture even before the Ottomans showed up?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Remember that Cumans were just one group among many.
Right?
Let's rewind a bit further and talk about the Pechenegs.
The Pechenegs, okay.
They were another nomadic Turkic group
Okay.
that migrated westward, frequently clashing with the Byzantines on, you guessed it, Bulgarian territory.
Right.
Some even ended up serving as mercenaries for those same Byzantines.
Uh-huh.
It's all very intertwined.
Wow, talk about a tangled web. Okay, so we've got Cumans and Pechenegs.
Yeah.
Any other Turkic groups we should know about in this pre-Ottoman mix?
Well, we can't forget about the Bulgars themselves, the group that gave Bulgaria its name.
Of course, yeah.
This is where things get a little more, shall we say, academically spicy.
Yes, the Bulgar question. I have to admit, this is the part where I started doing some serious head-scratching as I went through the source material.
Well, the theory of a Turkic origin for the Bulgars is actually pretty well supported by the historical evidence.
Yeah.
But this theory is heavily disputed, primarily by those who subscribe to a more nationalist interpretation of Bulgarian history.
So it's not just a dry historical debate. It's tied up in ideas about national identity, which always makes things more complicated.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it highlights something crucial about history.
Uh-huh.
It's never just about facts and dates.
Right.
It's also about how those facts and dates are interpreted and used to construct narratives.
Right.
And those narratives often serve particular purposes, reflecting the values and beliefs of the people who create them.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
And it definitely explains why the origin of the Bulgars is such a sensitive topic.
Yeah.
But just to round out the picture here, were there any other Turkic groups we need to factor in before we get to the Ottoman period?
One more key group, the Oghuz.
The Oghuz, okay.
They played a significant role in the migrations that brought the Seljuks into the region.
Okay.
And as you might know, the Seljuks went on to clash with the Byzantines, further shaping the political landscape that the Ottomans would eventually step into.
So by the time the Ottomans arrive on the scene, the region was already a melting pot of cultures and influences.
Precisely.
With various Turkic groups having left their mark.
This really sets the stage for understanding the Ottoman period in a more nuanced way.
Okay.
It wasn't just a sudden, dramatic clash of civilizations, but rather the continuation of long-standing interactions and power dynamics.
Uh-huh.
And that brings us to what might be the most surprising revelation from your sources.
Okay.
The concept of Ottoman tolerance.
Yeah. This is where my jaw really hit the floor.
Uh-huh.
When we think of the Ottomans, especially in relation to the Balkans, we often think of them as, well, conquerors.
Yeah.
But these sources present a very different image, don't they?
They do.
Yeah.
What's often emphasized is the resilience of the Bulgarian people in preserving their language and Orthodox Christian faith, despite 500 years of Ottoman rule.
Right.
And while that resilience is undeniable, These sources suggest that it wasn't the only factor at play.
Okay.
They point to something else that might have been equally, if not more, crucial.
Yeah.
A system of relatively tolerant policies within the Ottoman Empire.
Okay, so break that down for me.
Sure.
What do we mean by Ottoman tolerance?
It's important to understand that this tolerance wasn't necessarily born out of some deep altruistic belief,
Right.
but rather from a pragmatic approach to ruling a vast multi-ethnic empire.
Okay.
The Ottomans had figured out that allowing a certain degree of religious and cultural autonomy for their non-Muslim subjects actually helped maintain stability and control.
That's a really interesting point.
Yeah,
So it wasn't just about brute force.
right.
It was also about strategic accommodation.
Exactly.
But how did this play out in Bulgaria?
Well, the Ottomans didn't force conversion on their Christian subjects.
Okay.
They allowed the Bulgarian Orthodox Church to continue functioning, and they even granted certain legal and administrative autonomy to Bulgarian communities.
Wow.
So contrary to what some might assume,
Yeah.
Bulgarian language and culture were allowed to persist, even flourish in some ways,
Right.
under Ottoman rule.
So it's a more complex picture than just Bulgarians bravely resisted the Ottomans.
It-
It's more like Bulgarians found ways to adapt and survive.
Right.
And the Ottoman system, in its own way, facilitated that survival.
Exactly.
That brings us to another fascinating and perhaps even more challenging point raised by your sources.
Yeah.
The way Bulgarian history, particularly the narrative of Ottoman rule, was reshaped after Bulgaria's so-called liberation in the late 19th century.
Right.
This is where things start to get really interesting, don't they?
They do.
It's like we're suddenly shifting from a historical deep dive to an exploration of how history itself gets written and rewritten.
You're getting it.
Yeah.
In the process of building a national identity for a newly independent Bulgaria, certain narratives about the Ottoman period were, shall we say,
Yeah.
strategically adjusted.
Okay.
There's evidence to suggest that some Bulgarian intellectuals and historians downplayed this Ottoman tolerance we've been talking about,
Right.
choosing to emphasize a narrative of Bulgarian resistance and suffering instead.
Wait, so they actually revised history to fit a particular narrative?
Well, they did.
Why would they do that?
Well, remember what we said about history and narratives?
Uh-huh.
They serve purposes.
Right.
In this case, the narrative of a heroic Bulgarian struggle against Ottoman oppression served the purpose of solidifying a sense of national unity
Okay.
and distinct Bulgarian identity.
So it's not just about what happened in the past,
No.
but also about how that past is remembered and used in the present.
Precisely.
Yeah, that's wow.
And that, I think, is one of the most important takeaways from this deep dive so far.
Okay.
History is never neutral.
Yeah.
It's always being shaped, interpreted,
Right.
and sometimes even manipulated to fit particular agendas.
Okay, this is giving me a whole new perspective on not just Bulgarian history, but history in general.
Yeah, I think it should.
Okay, listeners, we've covered a lot of ground here in part one of our deep dive.
We have.
We've challenged some assumptions, unearthed some hidden complexities, and started to unravel the intricate tapestry of Bulgarian history and its connections to various Turkic peoples.
I like that.
But there's more to explore.
There is.
We'll be back in part two, so stay tuned.
Welcome back to our deep dive into Bulgarian history. I find it remarkable how these sources encourage us to rethink not only Bulgarian history, but also our understanding of the vast and influential Ottoman Empire.
Yeah, I'm with you there. It's a real mind bender to shift away from that stereotypical image of the Ottomans as just these relentless conquerors.
Yeah.
This whole concept of Ottoman tolerance really flips the script.
It does make you question some preconceived notions, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does.
And it reminds us that historical narratives often simplify complex realities.
Right.
Now, while we've talked about the pragmatic reasons behind Ottoman tolerance, it's crucial to acknowledge its profound and lasting impact on the cultural landscape of the Balkans.
You're absolutely right.
Yeah.
Even if it was born out of strategic considerations, this policy of tolerance had a ripple effect that we're still seeing today.
The sources you shared even go so far as to argue that this Ottoman system might have been a significant factor in the very survival of the Bulgarian language and Orthodox Christian faith. They present an interesting contrast with the period after Bulgaria's liberation,
Right.
where there are claims of forced assimilation targeting Muslims, and suppression of Islamic practices.
That's a pretty stark contrast.
It is.
And it raises some important questions about historical narratives and how they evolved.
Right.
What I find particularly fascinating is how this shift from Ottoman tolerance to a seemingly less tolerant approach post-liberation seems to be directly tied to the construction of a national identity for Bulgaria.
That's a crucial observation.
Yeah.
Forging a national identity often involves creating clear distinctions between us and them. And in the case of a newly independent Bulgaria, seeking to distance itself from Ottoman rule, that them naturally became associated with the Ottomans and by extension, the Muslim population within Bulgaria's borders.
So this narrative of Bulgarian resilience during the Ottoman period, while containing elements of truth, also served to reinforce this emerging national identity.
Right.
It's almost like they needed to highlight the struggle, the resistance, to solidify this idea of a distinct Bulgarian people who had endured centuries of oppression.
You've hit on a key insight there.
Yeah.
It speaks volumes about the power of narratives.
Right.
They're not just neutral accounts of the past.
Right.
They are powerful tools for shaping the present and the future.
Yeah.
And sometimes that shaping involves streamlining or even distorting the complexities of history to fit a particular narrative.
It's a lot to unpack.
It is.
But where does this leave us in terms of understanding Bulgarian history?
Well, that's a good question.
Does acknowledging the role of Ottoman tolerance diminish the achievements of the Bulgarian people in preserving their culture?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's a question that these sources seem to be encouraging us to wrestle with. Does it have to be in either situation?
Right.
Can't we hold both realities in mind, the role of external factors like Ottoman policies and the agency and resilience of the Bulgarian people in maintaining their identity?
It feels like we're grappling with something that goes beyond just Bulgarian or Ottoman history.
We are.
It's about how we approach history itself.
Yeah.
It's about moving past those simplistic narratives of good guys versus bad guys, oppressors versus oppressed.
Precisely.
So,
and I think this deep dive has given us a prime example of how history is rarely black and white. It's full of shades of gray.
Right.
And it's precisely those shades that make it so fascinating and so challenging to understand.
So what does all of this mean for our listeners, for anyone trying to make sense of history and the world around us?
It means we should always approach historical narratives with a critical eye, be willing to dig deeper, and consider multiple perspectives.
Right.
It also means recognizing that history isn't just about memorizing facts and figures.
Yeah.
It's about understanding the intricate and often messy interplay of forces that shape our world.
Well said. And, this whole discussion has me thinking about the power of stories, the power of narratives in a much broader sense.
Yeah.
We've been focusing on historical narratives,
right?
But don't these same ideas apply to how we understand the world in general?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Narratives are fundamental to the human experience. They provide a framework for understanding events.
Right.
For constructing our identities, for relating to others.
Yeah.
Think about it. We use narratives constantly in our personal lives, in politics, in the media.
You're right. We tell stories about ourselves, our families, our communities, and those stories profoundly impact how we see ourselves and our place in the world.
But what's crucial to remember is that narratives are never neutral.
Right. They always carry a perspective, often with unspoken assumptions about the way things are or should be.
Right.
Recognizing these underlying assumptions is key to developing critical thinking skills.
Okay, so how do we apply this idea of narratives to the case of Bulgaria?
Well, I think it highlights the fact that the narrative of Bulgarian history, specifically the narrative of resilience and resistance during the Ottoman period, served a crucial purpose in forging a national identity for a newly independent nation.
Right.
It fostered a sense of unity and pride. But as we've discussed, this came at a cost.
Yeah.
It involved simplifying a complex historical reality and downplaying aspects that didn't fit neatly into that narrative.
So it's not about rejecting one narrative in favor of another.
Right.
It's about recognizing the validity of multiple perspectives.
It is.
The complexity and sometimes the contradictions within history.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And that, I believe, is one of the most valuable takeaways from our deep dive today.
It's a call to move beyond simplistic narratives, embrace ambiguity, and recognize that the past is never truly settled.
Yeah.
It's always open to reinterpretation, to fresh insights, and to deeper understanding.
This has been an incredibly thought-provoking conversation. I'm starting to see the connections between this seemingly obscure corner of Bulgarian history and the challenges we face in understanding information and narratives today.
And that, I believe, is the beauty of history. It's not just about memorizing names and dates. It's about drawing connections, seeing patterns, and extracting insights that are relevant to our lives. No matter how seemingly distant the subject matter might appear.
Well said.
Yeah.
And on that note, we'll wrap up part 2 of our deep dive into Bulgarian history.
Okay.
We've explored the nuances of Ottoman tolerance, the complexities of national identity formation, and the power of narratives in shaping our understanding of the past. But there's one more crucial idea we need to unpack before we conclude this journey.
There is.
So stay tuned for part 3. Where we'll delve into the implications of all that we've learned for navigating the world of information and narratives in our own lives. Welcome back to our deep dive into Bulgarian history.
Thanks for having me back.
We've covered a lot of ground.
We have.
From the surprising role of Turkic peoples to the concept of Ottoman tolerance and the power of historical narratives.
It's been quite a journey.
It has.
Yeah.
But now let's shift gears a bit and think about what all of this means for us here in the present.
Yeah, that's a great transition because, we live in a world absolutely saturated with information and narratives. Every day we're bombarded with stories from news outlets, social media, politicians, you name it.
It's true. And it can feel overwhelming at times.
It can.
How do we even begin to sift through it all and figure out what's reliable, what's biased, what's worth paying attention to?
That's where the skills we've been implicitly honing during this deep dive come in handy.
Okay.
Remember how we talked about approaching historical narratives with a critical eye? Questioning assumptions and considering multiple perspectives? Those same skills are absolutely essential for navigating the information landscape today.
So we can apply what we've learned about Bulgarian history to, say, understanding a news article about a current political conflict.
Absolutely.
Good.
Just like the narrative of Bulgarian resistance during Ottoman rule served a particular purpose. We need to be aware that contemporary narratives, whether about politics, social issues, or even scientific discoveries, are often constructed to serve particular agendas.
That's a sobering thought.
Yeah, it is.
So how can we become more savvy consumers of information? Do you have any practical tips?
One of the most important things is to be aware of your own biases.
Okay.
We all have them based on our backgrounds, experiences, and the communities we belong to.
Okay, so step 1 is acknowledging that we're not blank slates walking around with perfectly objective viewpoints.
Yeah.
What's next?
Next, try to actively seek out multiple perspectives on any given issue.
Okay.
Don't just rely on sources that confirm your existing beliefs. Read news from different outlets.
Okay.
Listen to podcasts with diverse viewpoints. And engage in respectful conversations with people who hold different opinions than your own.
That's a tall order sometimes.
It can be.
Especially when it comes to engaging with people who hold drastically different views.
Yeah.
But I see your point. It's about stepping outside of our echo chambers.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that complexity and nuance are almost always present. And it's about being willing to question your own assumptions.
Okay.
Ask yourself, why do I believe this? What evidence supports this claim? What alternative perspectives might I be missing?
It sounds like we need to approach information with the same kind of critical thinking we would apply to a historical mystery.
Precisely. And remember, just like the truth of Bulgarian history is more complex than a simple story of resistance, the truth about most contemporary issues is rarely black and white. It's usually somewhere in those shades of gray.
So if we can learn to apply these skills, critical thinking, awareness of bias, seeking multiple perspectives, we can become more informed citizens and navigate this overwhelming world of information with a bit more clarity and confidence.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And perhaps even more importantly, we can become more empathetic individuals, capable of understanding and engaging with the complexities of the world around us.
This deep dive has been a real eye-opener for me.
I'm glad to hear that.
I'm starting to see the connections between this seemingly obscure corner of Bulgarian history and the challenges we face in understanding information and narratives today.
And that, I believe, is the beauty of history.
Yeah.
It's not just about memorizing names and dates.
Right.
It's about drawing connections, seeing patterns, and extracting insights that are relevant to our lives.
No matter how seemingly distant the subject matter might appear.
Well said. So, listeners, as we conclude this deep dive into Bulgarian history, we leave you with this final thought.
Okay.
The skills we've explored. Critical thinking, seeking multiple perspectives, questioning assumptions.
Yeah.
These are the tools that empower us to become informed, engaged, and empathetic citizens in a world that desperately needs them.
Couldn't have put it better myself.
Thanks for joining us on this fascinating journey.
It's been a pleasure.
And until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep those minds open.